Hey guys! Today we're diving into another truly horrifying case. If you want to support my channel, make sure to subscribe and stay active. It really helps me out. I'd be super grateful for that. Let's get started. These days, criminal investigations rely on advanced technology that helps identify suspects faster, more accurately, and much more efficiently, while also making it nearly impossible to conceal evidence. In the past, investigators had to rely mainly on witness statements and circumstantial clues. But now, cutting-edge tools and scientific methods are at the forefront. Still, do they always work flawlessly? Especially when someone from the outside is actively interfering with the investigation? The case of Karen Reed is one of the most complex, confusing, and high-profile in the American legal system in recent years. Her partner, who worked in law enforcement, lost his life under very strange and still unclear circumstances, and she ended up as the main suspect in the case. But the investigation was hindered by severe weather conditions, and evidence seemed to appear and disappear in the most mysterious ways. As of today, this crime remains unsolved. Karen Reed was born in October 1977 in Blacksburg, Virginia. She earned a prestigious degree in economics and finance and steadily climbed the career ladder. People who knew her described Karen as ambitious, driven, and confident. She also had striking looks and a strong personality, which often made it difficult for her to maintain stable relationships. John O'Keefe was a Massachusetts native where his entire family lived. He was the youngest in the family and grew up with his older sister. His parents described him as unusually mature and deeply responsible for his age, always ready to lend a helping hand. He did well in school, was active in sports, and from a young age dreamed of serving in law enforcement. After graduating from the police academy, he began working as an officer in Canton, Norfolk County, Massachusetts. In 2018, John's younger sister and her husband tragically lost their lives in a car accident. They had been raising a son and a daughter who were still underage. Faced with the risk of being placed in state care, the two were taken in by their uncle, who became their legal guardian and welcomed them into his home. Karen and John first met in 2005 at a mutual friend's birthday party. They had a pleasant conversation, but things didn't go any further at that time. A few years later, they ran into each other again, and this time, their connection evolved into a friendship that eventually turned romantic. However, the relationship was far from stable. For years, they were on and off, never quite managing to settle down. By early 2022, 44-year-old Karen and 46-year-old John were living together in his home in Canton. John had been serving in law enforcement for nearly 2 decades, while Karen worked as a financial analyst at a major firm and also held a teaching position at the prestigious Bentley University. Both had solid careers and were financially secure, though for various reasons, they weren't in a rush to start a family. On Friday, January 28, 2022, Karen and John headed out to one of Canton's most popular bars, where they met up with friends. The group was enjoying themselves, talking, laughing, and having drinks. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Witnesses recalled that the couple looked relaxed and happy that evening. They were making plans for the weekend and showed no signs of tension or conflict. There were no arguments, no hostility. In fact, they seemed very much in sync, chatting, joking, and even inviting friends to join them on a ski trip to the mountains. Around 11 p.m., the couple decided to leave the bar. Their next stop was the home of Brian Albert, where a party was underway. Brian was a longtime friend and colleague of John's, and his house had gathered quite a crowd that night, many of whom were members of law enforcement, attorneys, and others working within the justice system. Around midnight, a Lexus LX SUV registered to Karen pulled up near the Albert residence. It was a bitterly cold winter night, with heavy snowfall and strong winds sweeping through the area. The streets were empty, and as a result, no direct witnesses could later be found. The vehicle remained parked for about 15 minutes, then simply drove away. According to Karen, she and John had an argument in the car. She decided not to go to the party, but John insisted, and eventually went in without her. Karen waited in the SUV for a bit, hoping he would come back and they would leave together. But when it became clear he wasn't returning, she got frustrated and drove home alone. Back at John's house, Karen couldn't fall asleep. She was upset about how things had played out. Between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m., she called John more than 50 times and sent him dozens of angry texts and voice messages. She never received a response. Around 4:30 in the morning, exhaustion took over and Karen dozed off briefly. She fully expected John to be home by the time she woke up and was preparing to give him a serious talk. But when she opened her eyes and looked at the clock, panic started to set in. By 6 a.m., John still hadn't returned. He wasn't answering his phone and wasn't replying to messages. Something totally out of character for him. Even when they had serious arguments in the past, he would cool down quickly, make peace, and always come home. Karen immediately sensed that something was seriously wrong. John's niece, a teenager named Jennifer McCabe, who had been living under his care since her parents passed away, also began to worry and couldn't sit still. Karen started calling friends, trying to find out if anyone had seen or heard from John. No one had spoken to him since the night before. Brian, the friend hosting the party, wasn't picking up his phone either. One of Karen's close friends, Megan, rushed over to her place to offer support and help with the search. The three women, Karen, Jennifer, and Megan, got into Karen's SUV and headed toward the Albert home, hoping maybe John had stayed the night there. But just a short distance from the property, near the edge of the driveway, something in Karen's demeanor shifted. She suddenly became visibly distressed, started crying, and brought the car to a stop. Without warning, she jumped out and ran toward a snowbank. Jennifer and Megan were confused. Later, they recalled that the snow pile Karen ran to didn't look any different from the others. Maybe just a bit larger. But when Karen began digging with her hands, she uncovered what appeared to be a shoe, and then the body of a man. She screamed and called for help. Megan ran over to her while Jennifer quickly contacted emergency services. It was John. Karen unzipped his jacket, began performing CPR and chest compressions, desperately trying to revive him. She continued resuscitation efforts until first responders arrived. Around 6:30 a.m., John was transported to the hospital, but tragically, there was nothing they could do. Medical personnel confirmed he had passed away. How, when, and under what circumstances this police officer lost his life, and what exactly caused it, remained unanswered. These were the questions a detailed investigation would have to uncover. Medical examiners did not find any major trauma on John's body, except for some unusual scratches and puncture-like marks on his right shoulder and forearm. However, there were multiple injuries to his head, including a fractured skull base, bruising and swelling on his face, and a broken nose. The exact cause of death couldn't be determined with certainty, so the report listed two contributing factors: a closed head injury and prolonged exposure to cold. On January 29, 2022, a snowstorm was still in full force, making it extremely difficult for investigators to examine the scene and collect evidence. The harsh weather created challenges. No one was sure how to clear the snow without disturbing possible traces or missing crucial details. Even then, law enforcement classified the incident as a crime, and Karen was immediately identified as the main suspect. She was taken into custody and brought to the station for questioning. Her story about the night's events was vague and inconsistent. Karen said she and John had been drinking at a bar until around 11 p.m., something that could be confirmed by about a dozen witnesses. Then, they headed toward a party at the home of one of John's colleagues. But on the way, they got into a disagreement, and Karen, upset with John, decided not to go inside. According to Karen, she dropped John off at the driveway of the Albert home. He walked toward the house, while she remained parked for about 15 more minutes, hoping he would change his mind and come back so they could leave together. When that didn't happen, she drove home alone. Karen's account had several inconsistencies, and it was clear she wasn't telling the full story. More importantly, it became evident that she had gotten behind the wheel after drinking. She was sent for medical evaluation, and test results confirmed the presence of alcohol in her system. Given the time that had passed between leaving the bar and the toxicology screening, experts concluded that Karen had likely been significantly impaired when she drove that night. This raised the possibility that she could have unintentionally caused an accident that resulted in John's death. According to forensic experts, the injuries John sustained, while serious, were not immediately fatal. If he had received medical assistance right away, it's likely he could have survived. But being left unattended in the extreme cold led to a rapid decline in his condition. Karen continued to deny any wrongdoing and insisted she had nothing to do with what happened to John. However, on February 1st, she was formally charged with second-degree involuntary manslaughter. She also faced charges for operating a vehicle under the influence and for leaving the scene without notifying anyone of the incident. Together, the charges could carry a lengthy prison sentence. But Karen made it clear she wasn't going to serve time for something she claimed she didn't do. On February 3rd, 2022, investigators presented their first official theory about what happened during the night of January 28th to 29th. According to their version, the couple got into a heated argument. After John stepped out of the vehicle, Karen, either intentionally or accidentally while under the influence, struck him with her SUV. Then she allegedly left the scene in a hurry, leaving her injured partner outside in the snow where he was exposed to the elements for hours. What stood out early in the case was that only Jennifer and Megan, who were with Karen in the SUV when John's body was found, were questioned as witnesses. Both women said they didn't notice anything unusual and that the snow bank Karen ran to didn't resemble a person lying under it. There were no visible signs suggesting someone was buried there. Based on those statements, investigators concluded that Karen must have known exactly where to look, which, in their view, implied guilt. Furthermore, a forensic search of her phone uncovered a suspicious late-night search. How long does it take for someone to freeze to death? Made at approximately 2:30 a.m. Karen had tried to delete it from her browser history, but digital experts were able to recover the record. This became a central piece of evidence against her. Karen claimed that she had, in fact, searched for that information, but not at 2:30 a.m. According to her, it happened much later in the morning when she was already looking for John. She said she feared he may have passed out in the snow and was trying to find out how much time she had to rescue him. Jennifer backed her up, stating that she was the one who actually typed the search on Karen's phone at around 5 a.m. at Karen's request. Still, investigators questioned why someone had attempted to clear the browser history and why the restored data showed a different timestamp. Detectives also interviewed friends who had been at the bar with the couple earlier that night. None of them recalled any signs of tension. Karen and John seemed to be having a great time, laughing, talking, and making plans. However, people close to them noted that the couple had long-standing issues. Their relationship had been rocky, marked by frequent breakups and reconciliations. Most of their arguments, according to acquaintances, happened after drinking. All of this painted a picture that wasn't in Karen's favor. Still, for reasons that remain unclear, no guests who attended the party at the Albert home were ever questioned. Police only interviewed the homeowners, who claimed John never made it inside the house. That was the extent of their involvement. No search was conducted at the property. No guest list was compiled. No visitors were brought in for questioning. There were no surveillance cameras on the Albert house or on nearby homes, so reconstructing the timeline became a major challenge. But what about the many guests who were there that night? People were arriving and leaving throughout the evening. Surely someone looked out a window, stepped outside for air, or took a smoke break. Why were none of these potential witnesses ever asked what they saw? The guest list for the party wasn't compiled until a full week after the incident, and it took another week before potential witnesses began to be interviewed, one by one at the police station. However, everyone questioned claimed they had seen or heard nothing. Some stated that they were too intoxicated to remember much of the evening at all. A surprising development came when fragments of a vehicle taillight were suddenly discovered at the scene, days after the incident. These shards matched the right rear brake light of the Lexus LX owned by Karen. The fragments were found exactly where John's body had been located. At first glance, this discovery seemed to support the theory that Karen had hit John, either accidentally or deliberately, and then left him out in the snow. But the big question was, why weren't these fragments found sooner? Despite difficult weather conditions and heavy snowfall, investigators had meticulously examined the scene. Snow had been carefully raked and sifted by hand to ensure no detail was missed. So how did relatively large pieces of broken plastic go unnoticed for so long? During a later interview, Karen admitted that she had broken the light on the morning of January 29th while backing out of the garage to go search for John. She accidentally struck his parked vehicle in the driveway. This moment was captured by the surveillance camera installed on the garage. Her account was backed up by both Jennifer and Megan, who witnessed the collision and even inspected the damage afterward. At that time, the damage was described as minimal. Just a small piece had chipped off. But after the SUV was taken in for forensic inspection, the taillight was found to be more severely damaged. Then, curiously, those previously missing shards turned up at the scene, where they hadn't been before. The whole situation raised more questions than answers, yet the evidence was still added to the case file. As investigators continued checking attendees from the Albert party, they learned that one of the guests was a woman named Irina, a former co-worker and one-time romantic partner of John. This led authorities to consider whether a confrontation between Karen and John may have stemmed from Irina's presence at the event. It was speculated that Karen, possibly uncomfortable seeing John's ex, chose to stay in the car while he went inside, hoping he would return soon. But he never did. There was even speculation about a possible secret relationship between John and Irina. However, witness interviews later dismissed this theory. Irina was reportedly happily married and said she hadn't been in contact with John since their breakup, not even as friends. Soon after, investigators introduced a new theory. They suggested that Karen might have refused to attend the party because Brian Higgins, another guest, was going to be there. He had reportedly shown interest in her for a long time, and according to some, may have been romantically involved with her. Higgins also served in law enforcement, and he and Karen had kept in touch. Their occasional text exchanges reportedly included flirty undertones, which some saw as indirect evidence of a possible relationship. Karen admitted she had known Brian for years and confirmed they communicated occasionally, but insisted they were just friends and that there had never been anything romantic between them. Brian also denied any involvement, though investigators said they needed to fully examine this version before ruling it out. As mentioned earlier, John had several unusual injuries on his right arm. On his shoulder and forearm were deep scratches and puncture marks that resembled animal bites. His clothing in those areas was torn as if a large dog had grabbed and shaken it violently. Oddly, investigators didn't pay much attention to this detail. The medical report didn't classify the injuries, only noting them as minor. Because of this, Karen's attorney brought in an independent forensic specialist. That expert claimed with near certainty that the wounds were consistent with bites from a large dog. Coincidentally, or not, the Albert family owned a full-grown German Shepherd, known to have shown aggressive behavior in the past toward both people and other animals. Neighbors had reportedly complained about the dog multiple times, but Brian, being a police officer, was allegedly able to smooth things over, and no formal complaints ever reached court. Karen's defense team filed a motion to involve professional canine experts who could determine whether the bite marks matched the Albert family's dog. But that's when a new twist emerged. The dog was suddenly gone. The family claimed it had escaped from their yard, and despite all efforts, they hadn't been able to find it. Another possible scenario was also considered by the defense. John may have gone into the house alone that night, just as Karen had said. By then, most of the guests were already heavily intoxicated, including John himself. Despite this, the party continued with more drinking. At some point, a heated argument may have broken out between John and another guest. That dispute could have quickly escalated into a physical fight, during which John was seriously injured. This version, according to the defense, better explains the type of injuries he sustained, particularly the facial trauma and skull fracture. They speculated that John was first struck hard in the face, breaking his nose and causing bruising. Then, he may have been hit from behind, leading to a fractured skull base. During the altercation, it's also possible that the household dog attacked him. Fearing the consequences of what had happened, the people involved may have carried John, unconscious or barely responsive, outside, leaving him in the snow. Then they returned to the party. Afterward, relying on personal connections, they may have protected one another and covered up what had occurred. Interestingly, Albert's nephew, a young man named Colin, had bruised and scraped knuckles on both hands. The injuries appeared consistent with having been in a serious altercation. But by the time he was brought in for questioning, nearly a month had passed and the wounds had almost completely healed. He couldn't provide a clear explanation for how they occurred. Another guest at the party showed similar injuries, knuckles raw and healing. He too was questioned only weeks later and was unable to explain when or how he had been hurt. The trial of Karen Reed began in April 2024 and quickly captured nationwide attention due to the intense public interest. Prosecutors argued that a dispute broke out between Karen and John near the Albert residence. According to their version of events, after John got out of the car, Karen ran him over, either out of anger or recklessness, and then drove away, leaving him to perish in the snow. To support their claims, the prosecution presented several key pieces of evidence: the taillight fragments found at the scene, the search query made on Karen's phone, and witness testimonies indicating ongoing issues in the couple's relationship. The defense, however, pushed back, arguing that the investigation was riddled with procedural failures. Many potential leads were ignored, critical evidence was overlooked, and witnesses were not interviewed in a timely manner. They also highlighted the fact that the Albert family and many of their guests had strong ties to law enforcement, a detail that was curiously omitted from official records. The defense suggested that those relationships may have allowed individuals to influence the investigation, as well as the detectives and witnesses involved. The prosecution insisted that John never entered the Albert home that night. Their argument was based on both witness testimony and location data from John's phone, which allegedly showed he remained outside a few yards from the house. However, the court viewed that data with caution, acknowledging it was subject to error, especially given the severe snowstorm that could have interfered with GPS accuracy. Still, one glaring question remained. How could so many guests at the party have failed to notice a seriously injured man lying just outside the house? A possible answer came from a snowplow driver called to testify by the defense. He said that around 2:30 a.m., while passing the Albert home, he saw nothing unusual near the driveway. No person, no disturbance. But on his return trip, just 30 minutes later, he noticed the Albert family's vehicle parked outside. That stood out to him because they were known for always pulling it directly into the garage. Another detail that raised eyebrows was the use of a leaf blower by officers at the scene, despite the obvious risk of disturbing or destroying potential evidence. Additionally, blood found on John's face, which had soaked into the snow, wasn't collected in a sterile container. Instead, it was scooped into a used plastic cup, rendering it unusable for forensic analysis. The taillight fragments that appeared days after the incident also caused suspicion. Karen Reed's attorney argued that the evidence may have been planted and petitioned for it to be excluded due to a high likelihood of tampering. Another oddity, Brian Albert claimed he had lost his phone just one day before an order was issued to confiscate it for review. The defense insisted that John's injuries did not match those typically caused by a vehicle impact. Instead, they strongly resembled trauma from a physical altercation. According to their theory, John had been attacked inside the house, struck in the back of the head with a fatal blow, and then left outside in the cold. Yet despite these claims, no official search of the interior of the Albert residence was ever conducted. In 2023, the Albert family sold their home and moved to a nearby town. The new owners soon began extensive renovations, stripping down walls and replacing all flooring. Any hope of retrieving potential evidence from the property was now gone. That same year, lead prosecutor Michael Proctor was removed from the case. He had a long-standing friendship with the Alberts and was accused of showing clear bias against Karen. Allegedly, he had tried to dig up anything he could to damage her reputation, even going so far as to hack into her personal computer, searching for compromising photos or videos. Due to multiple procedural violations, the case was sent back for further investigation. A new trial began in April 2025. During testimony, an expert presented a reconstruction of the alleged vehicle impact. It demonstrated that under no scenario could John's position result in injuries consistent with the broken taillight, particularly a fractured skull base and facial trauma, without other damage to his body. The conduct of law enforcement was also called into question, as protocol violations became evident. Several key pieces of evidence against Karen were determined to have likely been falsified. The most critical witness turned out to be the snowplow driver, who reaffirmed his original statement under oath. On June 16, 2025, Karen Reed was acquitted of second-degree manslaughter and fleeing the scene. She was released in court, but received 1 year of probation for driving under the influence. The case of John O'Keefe's mysterious death remains unsolved to this day. Thanks for watching, everyone. Your support means a lot to me, and you can help my channel grow by hitting that like button, dropping a comment, and sharing this video. Your engagement really makes a difference. See you soon.